Hello.
Hello. I'm Angela Rolfus. I'm a second-year PhD student here at Newhouse, and I am the research assistant for the Tully Center. And I'd like to welcome you to the 2015 Tully Free Speech Award. The Tully Center for Free Speech was founded in the fall of 2006 and was funded by a generous request from Joan A. Tully. As part of her request, Joan Tully asked that an award be given in honor of a journalist who has shown courage while facing a free speech threat. Today, we are here to present that award to Kathy Gannon. But first, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the stage Kathleen Carroll. Kathleen is the Senior Vice President and Executive Editor for the Associated Press, and she will be introducing this year's award recipient. Kathleen.
Thank you very much. It's a real treat to be here and to see so many of you turn out on a warm, for Syracuse, Monday night in the sort of spring. You know from your program that Kathy is the special correspondent for Afghanistan and Pakistan, that she's had a long and distinguished career covering a part of the world that until about 15 years ago was not on the front burner for a lot of people. You know that she has received a number of awards, and the Tully Award just adds to the distinguished roster that includes the International Women's Media Foundation Courage Award, the Canadian Journalists for Free Expression Award, and CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Burton Benjamin Award. She's also won the Gramling Award, which at the Associated Press is our most important internal award. What you don't know about Kathy is that she is the embodiment of everything that Tully seeks to recognize. She is tenacious, she is tough. She is a child of Timmins, Ontario. Find it on a map, I double dog dare you. Let us just say that if you complain about the cold in Syracuse, you have nothing compared to what the weather is in Timmins, Ontario, which is why as soon as she possibly could, she left Timmins for Pakistan. Since 1988, she has been in that region and covering all kinds of stories, assassinations, wars, and what she commands in that part of the world, as well as among her colleagues at the Associated Press, is enormous respect because she is all about getting the story right. At a time when people want to choose journalists who will tell only their side of the story, who will pick sides, Kathy commands respect because she's not about picking sides, she's about telling people's stories. And so when the Taliban came to power in Afghanistan, there was one journalist in all the world who could get in and cover the country, and that was Kathy Gannon. Believe you me, as someone who was trying to cover that country for a different organization at the time, it was damn frustrating to know that only Kathy Gannon could get in. But it's a real testament to her fortitude and her complete devotion to telling a truthful story. Now, she commands that kind of respect from people who, are basically armed warlords. And they have enormous respect for Kathy, who doesn't pay the slightest bit of attention to anything they tell them. She was telling us at dinner about an Uzbek warlord who was trying to get her to leave Afghanistan before the Taliban came in, and she conveniently missed the plane, and he left before she did. Now, as somebody who is head of a news organization full of people like Kathy who miss the plane a lot and like to tell you all the things that you've done wrong, it's a real treat and a challenge to be able to stand here and say how proud we are of Kathy and the things that she has brought to the AP and the things that she has brought to journalism. I also want to call out two other people. She'll tell you a bit about Anya Niedringhaus, her great reporting friend, the fabulous photographer whose work you'll see behind us as Kathy speaks. Anya was killed in the same attack that wounded Kathy. And I know you're not giving the award because Kathy was shot. You're giving the award for all of the decades of hard work that Kathy has been responsible for. But Anya was a special journalist as well, and I know you'll hear something about her work from Kathy tonight. The other person I'd like to call out is Patricia Ann Gannon, who is Kathy's devoted sister, whom I met in a hospital bed in a hospital in Frankfurt on one of the worst days for all of us, and who has helped Kathy in her recovery, and who is just a cool human being and a great, great friend of journalism and of Kathy, and I hope you'll get to spend a little time with Patricia Ann as well as Kathy tonight. Kathy, you make us proud every day, and it's a real honor to be here to introduce you. And I hope I've said all the nice things that you wrote down for me. And if I've left one out, I'll finish at the end. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, Kathy Gannon.
You know, more understand. After you?
Please.
After me?
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, audience. Thanks for coming. And thank you, Kathy, for being here.
Thank you very much.
I'd sort of like to backtrack and start with the question of how do you go from Timmins, Ontario, to Afghanistan and Pakistan?
As quickly as possible. Just kidding. Sorry.
Take us on your journey from that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I started reporting in Timmins, Ontario, which is about 500-600 miles north of Toronto. And I think I always knew that I wanted to work overseas. But what I really wanted to do before working overseas was know a little bit more about my own country and to report in Canada and report across Canada before going overseas. Although I always knew, I think, that I really, that was something I wanted to do. So I worked across Canada. I was city editor at a newspaper. I loved covering local politics. I loved covering the courts. I loved all the local coverage that I did, and it really forced me to develop my skills as a journalist, as a reporter, and the whole thing about making contacts and the value of contacts and how to report and how to question. And then when I did decide that it was time, after I'd worked in a number of provinces in Canada, I sold everything. And because in Canada we only have a handful of newspapers large enough to actually have bureaus overseas, so I knew that I wouldn't be able to go overseas with a newspaper. So I sold everything. And I had a friend of mine who was a photographer, and he had spent some time in northwestern Pakistan taking pictures of refugees and had really wanted to go back. And I had always wanted to go to Israel. So we went to Israel. And we worked there for a little bit, but it was very hard as a freelancer in Israel because, of course, everybody had their own people there and bureaus, and so to make money as a freelancer, it was probably not such a good idea. So then we went took the bus to Egypt, to Cairo, because there was no recognition of Israel by Pakistan. So you had to take the bus to Cairo, and then we flew to Pakistan. And I was freelancing there in northwestern Pakistan, and started off as a stringer for AP, living in Peshawar, covering. It was the Soviets were still in Afghanistan, and I started off as a stringer, and then the number 2 in Islamabad left, which was a local hire, and so then I moved to Islamabad as the local hire for AP. And then I've been there ever since.
And when was your first assignment in Afghanistan?
Well, I mean, the first assignment that AP gave me, shortly after I moved to Islamabad, the plane crashed, the helicopter carrying Zia al-Haq crashed. And it was also carrying the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan. So that was one of the first stories I covered. And I was sent to a place called Bahalpur, and that was where the crash had occurred. So I drove the night to get there, and covered the crash of Ziaul Haq's plane, which killed him, and eventually led to the election of Benazir Bhutto in 1989. And she became the first Muslim woman, or the first woman to lead a Muslim country. And then I went to Afghanistan actually just as the Soviets were leaving in February. My colleague, he was in Kabul for the withdrawal, and I went in with the Mujahideen. And then about a half an hour later, my colleague, Amr Shah, has a radio to his ear, and he's listening to the Dari, and he said, I don't know, a plane has gone into some place called the Pentagon, and I'm thinking, huh? And then a little while later, there was the aircraft that went down. So we went over to the UN guest house, which is the only place that had a television. And at that time, there were these two Christian girls who were in jail by the Taliban for proselytizing, along with 4 Germans. And anyway, a couple of young American girls who had gone to try to convert Afghans to Christianity. Go figure. And so we were doing that story, which had really sort of taken our time. And the mother of one and the father of another was there. And they were at the UN guest house, and they were just like in shock, because the mother of one had just arrived that morning. And for us, it was evening, morning your time, evening our time. So we saw it for the first time on television, was this, and we're like, who knows? But Amr Shah, my colleague, he knew, because he said, I think they're going to set us on fire. Probably.
So how quickly were you able to connect what happened on September 11th to
Afghanistan?
Afghanistan?
Well, I mean, Sally called me after the first plane went in, so into the towers. So there was a feeling right away that there was something that would be, could be associated with Osama, with Al-Qaeda. And it was quite well known at the time that Osama was in Afghanistan. And the US had made quite a big deal about wanting to get Osama out of the Taliban, to hand over Osama. And so I think there was a sense even at the very beginning that there was something involving Al-Qaeda. Otherwise, you know, she wouldn't have called. But and certainly immediately after, we were in the streets talking to people and asking them, you know, because most Afghans, first they didn't have television. They'd be damned if they knew where New York was or what the towers were, but they knew that something horrible had happened because they all listened to the radio and they listened to Pashto and Dari service. So they all knew something horrible had happened in America. And, but they didn't know the details. And of course there was mention early on of Osama, but nobody knew who Osama was really in Afghanistan, you know, the average Afghan and that. So it was really interesting to hear from people who had no access to television, had very little understanding of what is New York, or only that something horrible, like what they had been suffering for so many decades, had happened in the United States. And they were really quite, I wouldn't say heartbroken, but you know, they were very empathetic with what had happened at the time, not really understanding the details of it, other than a lot of people had died.
What kinds of stories were you writing from there? Who were you talking to? Were you just talking to officials? Were you talking to regular people?
Yeah, no. At the time, you mean after September
right after
11th?
9/11, yeah.
After 9/11? Oh no, everybody. I mean, we were talking to the officials. The Taliban foreign minister had a press conference that evening. We were talking to Afghans in the street. We were out. Amr Shah and I spent hours just wandering around the streets, roaming the streets, talking to as many people as we could. Yeah, and then of course with the Taliban that evening to ask them, you know, what were they going to do? Where was Osama going to, you know, where was Osama? Turned out he wasn't nearby.
How close were you on his trail? I assume that you would have some insight as a reporter on the ground into certain things that were going on there.
Well, you would think, but. Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly knew how that he was heavily financing the defense ministry at the time because of sanctions with the UN, that the Taliban had no money, so Osama had been providing a lot of the funding for the defense ministry. When the giant Buddhas were destroyed, these giant statues of Buddha in Bamiyan were destroyed by the Taliban. Actually, it was by Al-Qaeda. The Arab fighters who were there actually did the destruction, because after, when I went up before 9/11 to see, there was several Arabs we saw. So I knew the influence was great. I knew that Osama and the bulk of the Arab fighters were in Kandahar, because Mullah Omar had forced them all to move down there, and there was a huge housing complex at the Kandahar airport, where all the Arab fighters were living. So that I knew all that kind of information, but I wasn't like in telephone contact with them.
What's it like covering the Taliban up close?
Well, we had a lot of fights. We argued a lot. I was at the front line a lot, and it's like covering, as a reporter, your job is to try the very best you can to get the story. And so I did just that, as I was dealing with the Taliban. They tried to refuse to let me to allow for an interview, because they said I was a woman. One time they said, no, we'll let your photographer. And at that time we had a photographer visiting from Turkey who was there. And I said, no, I'm very sorry. He's a photographer. You'll have to talk to me. He said, no, we don't talk to women. So I sat there for like 6 hours. And in that culture, it's hugely embarrassing for your guests to be coming in and out, and there's a guest sitting there and you're ignoring them. So eventually he had to see me. I had to sit at the other end of the room, but he eventually had to see me. I would go and see them on the front line. There's front lines between the two. I would have discussions about all kinds of things with them, including their whole interpretation of Islam vis-a-vis girls and girls' education. And one time I was having an argument with one, and he said, he was going back and forth, and we're going back and forth, and he said, we call somebody like you. And I said, no, what? He said, a man. Not a compliment. No, just kidding. Just kidding. They were the government in power. So, if there was something going on, I was talking to them. When they closed down refused to allow women into the hospitals, and the Red Cross refused to treat then anybody until they opened up the hospitals again. I covered that story. I went into the women's hospital. They had set up one for women that was probably the best run hospital in Kabul. I went to the executions. I covered it like you would cover any, and I tried as best I could to tell the stories of what was going on and the people who lived in their environment across the country. But it was a mix, because you were telling the stories of the people. And a lot of the people in villages and that really live very much the same today as they did under the Taliban, as they did before the Taliban. The Taliban didn't invent the burqa. The Taliban, so it was, I think, or I hope, covered a whole variety of stories. Some of the things is when I used to like to do is, if I was ever doing an interview like about drugs or anything, there was girls there, I'd always say to the little girl, so what would you like to be, president of this country? The Taliban and all like, oh no. So it's my own little entertainment.
Do you know if the Taliban followed your coverage?
Sure. I got that some. There was some times there was some anger at some of the things that I had written, and but I think their ability to follow was not as great then as it is now, and so I think that probably made a difference. But certainly a lot of the local newspapers carried it. Often the BBC would carry a story from AP on their Pashto service, so they certainly knew a lot of the coverage. But I think their ability today to follow what is being said and written is probably greater.
Did you get any feedback? I mean, did they
They weren't always
criticize your
happy.
stories, or?
Sometimes, but I mean, yes, no, sure. I was called in at different times, and certainly we had to be careful that our own local staff were not impacted or hurt. And sometimes they threatened to throw me out, and then you go to see one, and you go see another, and and eventually and they also sort of had this sense that anyway the West didn't like them because they were under sanction, and they sort of expected that they weren't going to get great publicity or anything. But that being said, I did know some that were quite helpful in getting information about different stories, and we were able to do a lot of really interesting stories that didn't just deal with just the women, or just, all of which were great stories, and we did them all. But I think we tried and hopefully gave a sort of a look at what Afghanistan was throughout the country.
Do you think they had an appreciation for what you did as a way, at least for them, to get messages out?
No, I don't think so. I mean, no, sure. They weren't about trying to get messages out. That's not to be said that, I mean, they did attempt to try to say, listen, we've banned all the drugs. And they did. They did ban poppies, and they did it in a way that was very smart and very effective, because they dealt with at the local level, and it was very, very successful. And we did all those stories, but they certainly, I think, believed, the Taliban Council believed that it didn't matter what they did, it would never be enough. So I don't think they saw, that sort of look at seeing me as being able to change the opinions in the West toward them. They read it, I'm sure they, I don't really, and I honestly don't really even think about stuff like that most of the time, honestly. Whether they read, don't read, who thinks it's influences, or, I think for sure there were some. I think when I was allowed to return to Kabul during the bombing, I was the only Western journalist that the Taliban let back in for the last 3 weeks of the bombing. I'm sure there was a lot of attention paid to my copy, because I was the only Westerner there. But I don't know. I mean, I assume they were watching as much as they could. I'm not sure that there was a real deep desire to understand beyond a certain level. Because I know, for example, Holbrooke went to Afghanistan in 99, I think, or something. And I remember asking, because obviously the only issue was, and he was meeting with the Taliban, and the only issue really was Osama bin Laden, as far as I could tell. And I remember asking the Taliban, and he was like, I mentioned it to them, and they said that they would take care of him, and it was just sort of no concept of what does that mean? Would they really, or what was Osama doing there? He didn't have any details, and so I'm not so sure that there was a real deep concerted effort to really understand and to figure things out. I mean, I'm sure they would like to have, but they were probably distracted in many other different directions other than Afghanistan at the time.
How were you able to be the first Western reporter back in?
I begged. No, well, that as well. We did, literally. Amir Shah, our colleague who's fabulous, he was going every day to the information ministry, which is who you had to go to. I knew the information minister, and I had met him numerous times, obviously, because I'm covering Afghanistan for the whole time. I met all the ministers, so they all knew who I was, and they all knew our colleague, Amir Shah, who across the board knew everybody from every side of the conflict, and still does. And he was just kept at it, and every day I kept at it, and every day he kept at it, and finally, the information minister said, fine, tell her she can come. And the prime minister signed off on it. And so I quietly went up to Peshawar and crossed over. And the first time the Taliban border guard didn't couldn't get hold of anybody to say, yes, that was true, that I was allowed to. So he told me I couldn't cross. And so I'm yelling at him, and I'm saying, no, I've got the permission. And then finally he called and got hold of somebody, and the next day I was able to go. And I couldn't have been happier.
What kind of precautions do you take when you report from that part of the world?
Lots and lots and lots and lots, Kathleen. Sorry. And then, I mean, it's a different situation today than it was then. The security was much, much better then. So the ability to get from A to B was much more. You were much more sure and able that you could make it. Today it's much more difficult. There are certainly many areas that are very difficult to be able to get to with a degree of certainty that it will be okay, that you will be able to do it. Certainly Anya and I went to a number of places having taken very clear precautions, knowing the people in the area where we were going, knowing the area itself, having contacts from that area, in that area that were safe and secure, and finding out ahead of time what was going on in that area before we arrived. So there are all kinds of things that you can do to mitigate as best as possible the dangers of going to a particular area. And I think now you do have to try the best you can to know the people in that area, to be able to get information from them what the situation is like, because they're the ones who know the best and can give you the best information.
Did you ever feel threatened?
No. Sure. I mean, you know, there have been times for sure that you've been in a situation where you've thought, oh, okay, time to leave quickly. We were doing a story on the poppies in Nangarhar. Anya and I were there, and we were getting pictures, and we were hearing people in the background, Taliban are coming, Taliban are coming. And I'm saying to Anya, we've got to go. And she's just wanting to get, you know, this last little, but we left. Right? And so I mean but we were with somebody who knew the area and knew it well, and so it was fine. So I mean I've had and this was the U.S. Embassy came over to tell me that they had received some chatter. This was before this, and it involved Pakistani militants that they had mentioned me by name. And so we took precautions. The office came through immediately, and we increased the size of our walls at my home, and have a guard, and built a guardhouse and that, and it's been fine. So certainly there have been moments of danger and threats, but certainly they've been responded to quickly. And
huddling in basements during bombing raids and observing all sorts of violence that most Westerners usually can't really fathom. How do you do that? How do you get by?
I think that's it's over a span of many years that this has happened, and the landmine incident was a particularly scary, very scary one, and certainly one that has stayed with me in terms of someone died. We were walking through and we realized it was a minefield when somebody stepped on a mine, and then we had to go in the footsteps of, and so that was, and I think at the time you're so involved in what you're doing, and certainly in the bombing in the basement, that was both between 92 and 96, but also when I went back into Kabul. But you're there with everybody in the office. I mean, Amir Shah is huddling there, our Chowkidar, our guard, is huddling there. Abdullah, who looks after the house, is huddling. I mean, you're in it together, and I mean, you're taking your precautions, and you're in a basement, which was a wonderful thing to have in that house. So you're you're working your way through this together, and you also are in an environment that you know is involved in that environment. So I think you find your strength and your courage in each other, in those around you. When we're in a story, you know, Anya and I, when we've been doing something and it's been a little bit nerve-wracking, you find a calmness in the people that you're interviewing and you're talking to and you're photographing, and this is their life, and they're telling you, and you're talking, and you're sort of lost to yourself, and you're involved in what they're saying, and how they're surviving, and how they're living, and how they're, so that sort of settles your heart a little bit and calms you a little. And
when did you first start working with Anya?
Anya and I, we first started working in 2009 in January, February. They're not showing, but yeah, we actually first met at the AP House. Anya had just come off an embed, and we met in the kitchen at the AP House in Cobble, and we were getting coffee, and Anya said, oh, I've just come. I said, hi, and she said, hi, I've just come. And from an embed, I said, yeah, I know, I don't do embeds. And she said, well, I don't just do military stuff too, you know. And so it was a little rocky. And that evening on the balcony, we had, how we found it, I'll never know, but several bottles of wine. And go figure. Anyway, by the time we finished a few, we had decided on this story that I had been wanting to do forever. And we were talking about stories, and Anya had the same passion for wanting to tell a story. And Anya, she wanted to, she didn't want to be parachuted in. She wanted to see a story through and to really tell what it was like for people to live in that environment, to survive, and to have to show their courage and their strength and their difficulties. I mean, she had such a beautiful, beautiful eye. And I had wanted to do this story where you follow oil tankers, the oil tankers that brought the fuel to southern Afghanistan from Pakistan. And they had been attacked a lot along the route, and it was quite a long route to southern Kandahar in Afghanistan. And, but it was the linchpin in the war, in my mind, because the war took 500 million liters. What does that mean, liters? Lots, 500 million liters of fuel to run the war every day. It required 500 million. And they had to be brought in by these people who drove trucks across very dangerous roads and risked bombings and everything. Excuse me. And I really wanted to tell their story. And Anya loved the idea of it. She thought, oh, that's great. Well, I had pitched it a little while before and hadn't been able to get the TV and photos to think that that was such a great idea security-wise, that it might be a little bit problematic. So Anya said, no, I want to do it, and I could do the video, and we'll, you know, it'll be a great story, and we'll do it. So fabulous. So I arranged it and we got permission from the office through everybody. Maybe not New York at the time. But anyway, and so we, I found the company that hired these guys, who were, and they made the equivalent of about $120 for each shipment that they brought over. We met with them in Quetta in southwestern Pakistan to Kandahar. It was a 2-day trip. It took us a long time to arrange everything. Anyway, it was a 2-day trip. We traveled with the oil tanker, everything, and this was our first trip together. And Anya was so wonderful with the people. She couldn't have been happier sitting in that truck, you know, as we sort of rumbled along down these horrible roads and through this pass, and she's taking pictures, and I was talking to them, and it was just really to tell that story of really the linchpin of this war that nobody knew about, and really were anonymous, but took huge risks for a very small amount of money, and to be able to tell that story, we were thrilled to have that opportunity. So that was our first story together, and it went really well, and although we did get stopped by the US military in Afghanistan that tried to say that we couldn't be there, even though Anya and I had come, we had our Afghan visa, and we went legally. We left at Pakistan at the border, and I had gotten special permission so she could do that. They stamped our passport. We went over to the Afghan side, to the passport office down in the south. Poor guy, first day on the job, here's Anya and I, 2 foreign women, and he's like, what? You know, we present our passports with our visas, and we're coming to your country, and he stamps it, and we go off, and the American soldiers were at this particular border crossing. And our driver had said that they do provide some security, and so Anya and I, and Anya's got out of the truck so she can take pictures of him coming across the border. And I see him, and so I'm American, and even though I'm Canadian, I go up and hi, how you? And he looks at me, and he looks at Anya, he says, you can't take pictures. Well, I hardly got a chance to say that we were from AP. So anyway, we had a bit of a discussion. None of it civil. And that went on for quite some time, and they held us and weren't going to let us go until I convinced them that in fact they were causing us more danger, and we were going to be staying in Kandahar, and so to be seen with you would be. And they said, well, you know, the Afghans, and I said the Afghans wanted to invite us for tea. I mean, they were thrilled to see us. And I said, anyway, their country, we have the visa, you have no authority. And eventually they let us, but they called their office in Kabul and said there are two women posing as AP journalists in Kandahar. So they denied knowing us at the time. No, they didn't. They didn't. So that was our first story together. And after that, it was we had such a great time. It was.
What other stories did you two work on?
Well, we did. We were the first to embed with the Afghan army. We went through the Afghan through the Afghan Defense Ministry. It was the first time any foreigners, Westerners, had embedded. So the U.S.-led coalition, ISAF, was quite upset that we hadn't gone through them because we went through the Afghan Defense Ministry and showed up like in Gardez with a letter with a seal on it from the Defense Ministry, and the poor Afghan, he's like, I don't know. And the American soldier, Anya was waiting outside, and he said to her as he left, he says, they'll never let you stay. You'll be out of here by the end of the day. 2 weeks later, we did an embed with them for 2. We did an embed with the Pakistan Army. We were the only people that have ever embedded with the Pakistan Army. We did the story on the drugs. We did that one where we went. We did election stories. We were down in Kandahar several times. We went up to Kunduz and did several stories up in the north. Yeah, we did a lot of firsts, Anya and I.
Take us back to April 2014.
It was April 4th, and Anya and I, first we were planning on going to it was the elections. April 5th were the presidential elections in Afghanistan. And Anya and I wanted to cover it outside of the city, and we had a photographer from, wonderful photographer, Mohammed Muhaisin, had come in from Islamabad to cover the election in Kabul, and we were going to host. I had known the governor for years, and so we were going to stay with the governor. It was a highly fortified area, everything. And we were actually going to fly there, but then it rained, and so we couldn't. And Anya was just so disappointed at the thought of having to stay in Kabul. She was actually in tears when there was a suggestion that maybe we couldn't go because we would have to drive. So I investigated whether it was secure to drive, and we passed the security. The UN had actually made that trip 2 weeks before, as had the US Institute of Peace, had sent 2 people down to host 2 weeks before. And they had flown in, but had not been able to fly out, so they had to drive that road. So, and it's funny, the fellow from Andrew Wilder, he made a comment the night before we left on the 4th. He said, because there had been a Danish journalist had been shot in the head in Kabul, There had been an explosion at a five-star hotel in Kabul, and several people had been killed. And so when I said we were going to host, we'd be leaving the next day, he said, "Oh, that's probably it's probably safer there than here to cover the election." So we went and we got there, and that morning of the 4th, Anya and I were going with the Afghan police and the military to outlying areas to deliver the last of the ballot boxes for the election the following day to the remote villages. The reason we wanted to go to host was because it's in the east of the country. It's Haqqani territory. Haqqani is a very powerful and strong affiliate of the Taliban. And we really felt that if you could tell the story of this part of the country and how they were able to mark their ballot, go to the ballot box, what was the conditions that they had to endure to go? Would they go in large numbers? Would they be frightened to go? How would they go? Telling all of that would give a real insight into the larger look of where Afghanistan was after 13 years, and this election was a change. Hamid Karzai was not running. So it was a real significant, and we thought it important to be telling that side. But we had taken all kinds of precautions. We were staying at the governor's mansion, which was heavily fortified, and we went out with the police. It was a convoy of police and Afghan military, and we were in the middle of the convoy. And I always thought that IEDs, improvised explosive devices, were always really my biggest fear. So I always thought the middle of the convoy was best because they always seem to hit the beginning or the end. So I thought, okay, we're in the middle. And Anya wanted to go at the front, and I said, no. I said, if we go, you're coming in the car with us. She had already gotten lots of pictures of the huge line of military vehicles and everything. Anyway, we got to this police compound, which is a large, huge compound where you could drive in. There was trucks in there. There was several buildings. We had driven our car in there. And we were with our translator, Rafiula, and with our AP television person, who was also, it was his car that we were driving, Nishanuddin. And we did our stories. Anya and I interviewed everybody. Anya took all her pictures, and the police were being divided up, and ballot boxes were being divided so that this group of police would take it to this village, and other ones would be distributed elsewhere. So Anya and I we finished ours, and then we were going to go to a village about 15 minutes away. So we had already done our work. Nishanuddin was doing a little bit more filming. So Anya and it was starting to drizzle a little bit, so Anya and I got in the car, and in the back seat of the car, and Nishanuddin and the translator were out. And Anya had just lit up a cigarette, and she had looked over. She was sitting beside me, and I don't remember the gunman lifting his AK-47. I remember only the last of the bullets hitting my body, because when they hit, the body jerks, and I felt the last two. And I thought at first it was an explosion that had occurred under our vehicle, and that was what it was, and that's why I was. And then I could smell this sulfur, the strong smell of sulfur. And so I realized that it had been a shooting, that we had been shot. And my hand was almost severed, and I couldn't move my right side because 3 bullets had hit me on this side. And this hand was almost severed. And Anya was leaning into me, and I didn't know. I just saw our driver and translator, who such lovely people. I'm sure they were in shock, and I'm sure they thought we were both gone. And I just said, please help us. And they jumped in the car, and we drove. And I was sure that because the hand was almost severed, I thought that I had lost, an artery was. And I didn't know about Anya. I could sort of glance over, but I couldn't see anything, so except for her hair. She had gray hair, so I could see it. And we were leaning into each other. Neither one of us had fallen over, and I was just trying to concentrate on going peacefully, because I thought that it was a 40-minute drive, and it was quite bumpy. I just thought, I just don't want to be afraid. I just want to go peacefully. So I was really focusing on that, and thinking I've had a good life, and I've done the best I could, and And I thought maybe Anya was thinking the same. I didn't know whether she was gone, and but they, you know, I could hear them yelling in the front, and it was just, we were both heavy against each other. And then we got to the hospital, and they pulled me out of the car, and they, very respectful, put me on the gurney, and they took Anya out on her side, and the doctor removed, I was hit with 6 bullets, and the doctor removed, and an Afghan doctor who is remarkable. He took me for a chest x-ray. All I remember saying at the time is, please give me painkillers. And he kept saying, I've given them to you, I've given them to you. And, but very nicely, he gave me a chest x-ray. My lung had collapsed, and he did surgery there. And then I woke up the next day, I believe, at the French military hospital in Kabul. And that's when I realized for sure that Anya had died, and the office had tried to get everybody mobilized, obviously, and they'd been spectacular. And President Karzai, who I had known for 20-some years, actually, he really is the one that came through and got in touch with the U.S. General in charge, Dunford, and called Dunford, who they weren't having a great relationship at the time, was not exactly excited to hear from Hamid, and said, you have to please move them to Kabul. So the Afghans took us, I think, to Forward Operating Base Chapman, and the Americans moved us to the French military hospital. And then the office medevaced me. And I just want to say, not just because Kathleen is here, but AP has been spectacular. Spectacular. I mean, not just in caring for every need that I might have in my recovery, which has been long and intense, but kind. I mean, the level of kindness of Kathleen, absolutely, and of AP colleagues has been really breathtaking for me. Absolutely breathtaking.
How long were you in the French military hospital?
I believe it was just the day. I think I woke up in the morning there, and I was medevaced out that evening to Germany. They took me to Turkey first. We changed planes, and my colleague, Patrick Quinn, had come in from Cairo. And I mean, this was, I didn't know anything. I mean, he was there though, and he stayed with me all the way to Germany.
How long were you in Germany?
I was in Germany about 6 or 7 days, maybe 8 days. And then AP, I mean, Kathleen got in touch with the medical reporter. Our medical reporter, who was fabulous, put together a list of doctors who might be able to, would be the best for my injuries, and sent me all the information, and I went through it with my sister and my husband, and my brothers were there, and we just really went through everything and settled on this Dr. Wolf at the Hospital for Special Surgery. But they had looked at somebody in Canada, which was very nice, and somebody in London, and just been very nice. And settled on the Hospital for Special Surgeries, this Dr. Wolf, and it turned out he wasn't going to be there, so he suggested this other doctor, his colleague, and who was training with him, who was a doctor, but brilliant, Dr. Fufa, and she seemed ideal. She was a microvascular. There was a tremendous amount of work, and had to take bones from my leg and redo nerves, tendons, muscles, tissue, everything. And so Dr. Fufa, and so I settled on her, and she is brilliant. Absolutely, she has been, not just that she is a spectacular doctor, but she is kind, and it's always about the team, and everybody has worked together. It's just been a remarkable, and my physiotherapist there was brilliant, or is brilliant, at the Hospital for Special Surgeries. So I've had 16 surgeries.
What's the prognosis?
Success. No, this hand is pretty good. I'm back at work. I've been back at work since the beginning of January, and it's been fabulous. I mean, I am just so grateful for so many things. I'm so grateful that able to be here. I'm so grateful that for the time I had with Anya. I'm so grateful that I'm back at work. I'm so grateful that AP has allowed me to. I was doing stories in Karachi just recently on the Islamic State's involvement and progression in Pakistan and how they're moving in and recruiting and on the Taliban talks. And I'm just thinking, how lucky am I? How really lucky am I? So the prognosis for my work is great. I can type with these 3 fingers. I'm getting very good at it. I don't, this one because one of the bullets hit here. This hand doesn't have a lot of movement, but it's still early on. There might be more. I'm trying to get it used to just even with a couple of fingers on that side when I'm typing. My typing is, you know, initially it was frustrating, but it's like anything, you get used to it, and my speed is getting pretty good, and I typed all my stories and sent them in, and you know, doing great. So I mean, the jury's still out on how much I get out of this, but it really is out, and so I've got a lot of possibility.
Are you in much physical pain with your arm still?
Occasionally, but I mean, my goodness, I can get up and walk. I mean, I am so fortunate. When they took the bone out of my leg and they put it in here, and I got up like the next day, and the doctor said something, and you know, you could wait or whatever. And I said, really? I said, I can walk. How shameful if I didn't get up and do it and try. How shameful not to. So my goodness, how lucky am I? I mean, you know, for whatever limitations, my goodness, you know, I mean, I've got so lucky. So yeah, a little bit, but.
Are you going back in the field?
Yes, I'm back. I'm back in Pakistan. I'm back, and I'm going to Afghanistan. When I get back, I'll be going, absolutely, because, you know, but it is a process, and I understand that, you know, and there has to be the first, and there has to be, but you can't be held hostage to fear, because otherwise you can't. First, it changes who you are and what your image of yourself is, and so I will go back, absolutely, because I won't let any crazy gunman decide. And Anya would never. I mean, Anya, she a grenade went off and she had shrapnel, and she was embedded with the Canadian. She said, I'm just going to Kabul. I will be back in a couple of days. Believe me. And of course she couldn't. She had to go and have surgery and everything. And boy, she was just so pissed off that she had to leave to have everything done, and because she wanted to go right back to Kandahar. And so for sure, I will, and eventually I'll just be reporting like I was before. I mean, this cannot be allowed to define me. It's a horrible thing that happened, but I mean, I was doing a lot of things before, and I'll hopefully do a lot of things after. I'm well known in Afghanistan anyway. I mean, I've known a lot of these characters for years. This shooting doesn't make me that much more known, frankly, in Afghanistan. I mean, you know, because a lot of these people, they've gone through. So it's not like people will say, oh, you know. I mean, some will, of course, friends who I know, but when they see my name reporting, it'll be like, oh, where was she? You know, I mean, it's because for a lot of them, it'll just be that, you know, oh, Kathy Gannon, she's, you know, whatever their opinion might be. Not always good.
The man that shot you was initially sentenced to death, and then it got reduced to 20 years in prison.
He was, and I'm good with that. I don't believe in the death penalty. Anya never believed in the death penalty, but our AP has followed it and has watched it and has. He is in jail. He initially was in Pulicharki, which is a very infamous jail, really, in Kabul. And now he's at a prison called Bagram, which is just north of the city, that used to be run by the Americans. It's now run by the Afghans, and he's sentenced to 20 years. And that's good. I'm good with that, as long as he's in jail and he's punished. And it wasn't, as far as anybody could tell, that he was actually sent by anybody, and the Taliban denied responsibility immediately. I have people who know different people, and I know some who said that really there wasn't any, even a sort of a rogue commander who had suggested, or Haqqani people who had suggested that this would be good to. So, yeah, I mean, for me, I want to see him finish his sentence and stay in jail.
I'm sure we have a number of students in the audience who want to have your job, or a job like yours.
Kathleen, don't hire them. I'm still, at least not until I'm finished, you guys, come on. Sorry, sorry. Yeah, not until I'm done with it, sorry.
What advice do you have for a future foreign correspondent? How do they be the best that they could be at that
Well,
job?
my advice, not that I'm anyone to give any advice, but really honestly, for me anyway, and this is just for me, is that it's so important. The fundamentals of reporting is really what is important. It doesn't matter whether you're covering really the education beat in Syracuse or the Taliban in Afghanistan. The principles are the same, the skills are the same, and I think before people go to another country, whether you call it international reporting, before you go to another country, and this is what I felt when I wanted to first know my own country well enough before I felt that I had what it took to tell the story of another country and people of another country. To me, it seemed a little disrespectful to think that I could just go and somehow tell their story when I wasn't, familiar enough with my own country. And the skills of questioning, the skills of contact making, how to make contacts, how to keep them, how to ask questions, what's important, what's a good story, all those skills that are you're taught in the classroom, but you really need to hone them on the job. And I really do believe if you can't do the small story good, you cannot do the big story good. I mean, it's those skills are fundamental. And I mean, I used to be so excited covering the court beat in Timmins, Ontario. And really, you'll never find it on the map. But so, and when I got to cover city council, I thought I had made it. I mean, this was really, but I worked so hard, and I really, and all those skills that I developed and the things that I learned, I used the same set of skills covering Afghanistan, covering the Taliban, covering Central Asia, in Lebanon during the war between Hezbollah and Israel. I mean, it's the same set of skills. So I really believe, and that to be able to tell a story well, you have to really hone your skills. And I think before you can tell the stories of another's, you should. And I also think that it's really important to want to understand what is going on in the world, not thinking that you're going to change it. And that's my advice. So you don't have to get up and walk out. No, just kidding.
I could ask you questions all night, but I think some people in the audience might have a few questions too. I believe we have a floating mic around. Just raise your hand and please feel free to ask a question.
What happened to the...
I'm not going to use this. How did you know you wanted to be a foreign correspondent?
Yeah,
I'm Josh. I'm a sophomore. How did you know you wanted to be a foreign correspondent?
Well, Josh, I think when I see other parts of the world, I mean, even for me, the United States was wow. I mean, I come from northern Canada. I mean, really north. And so I was really, the idea of being able to see other parts of the world was so exciting for me. So I think I really knew that that's what I wanted to do, but I wanted to be able to tell the stories and to try to understand. And I knew right from when I began at my first job how much I needed to know and to be able to just to do the job that would then allow me to be able to go and travel and tell those stories. So I think I always, had that desire, living very far north, and it's quite isolated, wanting to explore different parts of my own country, and then wanting to see, I knew there was that desire to know more. I realized how much I didn't know and how much I didn't understand. You know, I'd read things, I'd read biographies, I loved biographies, and which is why I eventually wanted to go to Israel, because I had read Golda Meir and I fell in love with her, and you know, I mean, so there was all these, everything was exotic for me, and coming from Timmins, my goodness, Toronto was exotic. So I mean, you know, I was really interested, but I wanted to be able to tell stories. I wanted to be able to, so I knew how much I needed to know. And I understood how important it was to know the skills and know my own country. And somehow that seemed respectful to me. That seemed respectful.
Were you, was there ever a doubt in your mind that you'd want to, you know, go back to Afghanistan, or did that desire never fade?
Never a doubt. Never a doubt. Never a doubt. First, I love the story, and I you know, there's never a doubt, but never a doubt because I knew that I can't be, I can't allow this to make decisions for me. I've been covering that country for a lot of years, and I'm good at covering that country, and that's what I want to do, and so I knew that I didn't want someone else to make that decision for me, that I you know, and in an incident like that. And I also understood that if I don't, that fear would develop, even if you don't want it to, you know, you suddenly, it's like, well, maybe, well, you know, things start to creep into your mind, and you have to get beyond that. You have to get beyond looking at people differently. You have to, you know, so I knew I didn't want to change. I don't want to change who I am and how I feel about things. So I always knew I would have to go back, and I also and I want to. And I also knew Anya would absolutely never even entertain the idea of not returning. So yeah, I mean, it never for a moment occurred to me that I wouldn't go back to Afghanistan. And I'm happy to. I want to. I mean, it's not like, oh gosh. Sorry, I saw your hand.
Hi, my name is Sarah Perks, and that you had if you could go back and do anything differently, would you?
In relation to this incident?
No,
anything?
just in general, like with your
okay.
career. No?
And you know, isn't that funny? But you know, honestly, and shot to, I really thought I was going to die. I mean, I really, honestly, I mean, I was trying so hard to be calm, but really, I had a good life. There wasn't anything that I wanted to change. I was, you know, I felt like I had done the best I could. There wasn't anything that I thought, gee, that, you know, why didn't I do this? Why? Absolutely not. I was really, I thought, wow, I've had a really good life. So no, not, you know, not a thing.
Hi. Hello. Matt
hello.
Weinstein, a junior broadcast digital journalism major. When you were talking about the core functions and purpose of journalism, which of those, in your opinion, came the hardest to you, and which of those became the easiest for you to start with? Like you were speaking of networking and being investigative, like which part was your greatest strength, and what maybe you saw as your greatest weakness that you turned into a strength?
I think you know, contacts, meeting people and making good contacts is a real strength for me. Going out and interviewing and meeting people and talking to as many as possible. I guess I'm might not believe it, but I'm a little bit shy. I used to be very. I mean, at a press conference, I'm always the first one to put my hand up, because if I don't, it sticks in my head, and I'm nervous about standing up to ask the question. So whenever there's a press conference, sometimes I don't even know the question. And if they come to me first, sometimes I'm stuck. But I put my hand up first because I know I'm so afraid of it, so I have to keep doing it, you know. So I do it first and get it out of the way, but I always do it because it still to this day at a press conference makes me nervous. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. But I mean, you know, a lot of it has been a development over the years, you know, learning how to ask questions and being empathetic and focusing so hard on being open-minded. Yeah.
Hi, how are you? My name is Alexandra. Here. I'm a master's student, and I wanted to know how long did it take you to get yourself integrated completely in the culture?
I don't think I am. You know, I mean, I'm Canadian. I might not wear this outfit, but even during the Taliban, I mean, I wore my jeans and a long shirt and a scarf on my head. And one time, when Taliban came up to Amr Shah, my colleague, and he said, "Your boss is so humble. She wears the same clothes all the time." It was like the same shirt. And so, I mean, I very much enjoy both countries. I have wonderful friends. There's a lot of similarities. I'm not. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I don't. I've never worn a burqa except to, you know, on the road or something where to protect. But certainly, the Taliban once tried to, and I said, you know, I can't pose as a Muslim. We all know that that's not right. I don't judge, and I hope that people don't judge me. But am I integrated? I have a wonderful life. So but I mean, it's pretty clear that I'm, you know, a Canadian, but I'm happy when Pakistani friend says, oh, she's part Pakistani. I'm happy. I'm happy when Afghan friends say, oh, she's part Afghan. You know, so, and that also makes me happy, so, yeah.
Hi, I'm Jeanne Suter.
Oh, hi. Oh, hey, hi.
Yeah, we met.
Are you angry?
I'm not angry.
Oh, sorry, that's an inside joke.
Okay. This is kind of related to the last question, but how much has fluency in a foreign language opened doors for you as a journalist?
Well, I had to work really hard at language, to tell you the truth. And I speak Urdu, which is the language spoken in Pakistan. And I had to go to the university to learn that. And really had to make an effort because I'm not strong with languages. So I really had to make an effort. At one point there was a suggestion that I might go to Iran as a bureau chief, and then they wouldn't give me the visa. I studied Persian at that point. So I think it certainly helps me in terms of my own comfort level, but I think there's a pros and cons to it, you know. I mean, certainly it's good to know, even though sometimes you'll have somebody with you, a local colleague, but you know what they're saying or what they're saying to them, you know, but it gives them that one buffer from you, you know, so it's very important, of course, you know, to be able to know a language so that you can talk when you go out to villages, you can go and you can, but I think sometimes it's also good to have somebody with you and you know the language, but they're talking through them because they're seeing the foreigner, but they're talking to a local, so you know that they're saying to Amr Shah, don't say that to her because you know that this isn't what we want, you know, and it's not right. Everybody's going to say that this is, you know, and so you know that, and it gives that buffer, but you still get the information, and you still, so, yeah.
Hi, my name's Amanda Finney, and I'm a grad student as well. And I was kind of wondering, as the only journalist let into the territory, you know, post 9/11, how does that pressure, I guess, affect you to get the right story, get the correct story, and then how does that like affect, you know, do you let that affect you since you were the only voice, you know, telling that story in such a crucial time, like worldwide, basically?
Yeah, I have to say, you know, honestly, I feel like I know what the stories are to do. You know, I mean, you talk to the desk, of course, and you're talking to each other and everything. But there was a pressure to tell the story, but in my mind not, but to try to tell the story of what it was like for the people living there. So it wasn't like I felt pressure to tell the right story or the wrong story. I felt like I knew the story I wanted to tell. I mean, and it was the story to tell. It's like for many, many years, some of my closest friends were Reuters correspondents. Never occurred to me that that was competition. I mean, obviously you have to be the first one out, but accurate. But I always felt like I went after the story because that was the story. Whether you thought it was or not made no difference to me, or you know. So I think when I went in, I knew all the stories I wanted to do. Certainly the desk had other ideas as well and said, what about this? And that was good, that, you know, because they're looking at it from another perspective, and they have more information coming in to them. So they say, oh, well, you know, we've been hearing this. What are you able to find out here? You know, and so there's that give and take, which affects what stories you choose. But otherwise, I didn't feel that, oh, I'm the only one there, so I've got to tell these stories. I just felt like, how lucky am I? How lucky am I to be there and to be able to tell these stories? I mean, you know, any of them. The fact that they used to turn all the lights off at night, thinking that somehow the American bombs couldn't see them. You know, I mean, radar. Anyway, so it's, you know, it's just, yeah.
Hello.
Yes?
Hi, my
Hi.
name is Tavishi Singh, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the photo essay that's on the screen right now.
Thank you very much for asking. Okay, I have to look at it. This was our embed with the Pakistani army, and it was we had to walk 3.5 hours up knee-deep snow to the top of a mountain because it was an outpost, and we spent the time up there. Anya, who said, they said it's really deep in the snow and everything. And she said, they were telling, and I said, so they're just telling that because they don't want us to go. There's no snow. And so we drove, and then suddenly he said, okay, you have to walk. And I said, where is the post? We looked up, and it was like in the clouds. And I said, how are we going to get there? He says, well, I think walk. So I turned to her. I said, yeah, no snow. So this is, and they have these white outfits. There's more. Yeah, you could just, yeah. That was there. It was cold. You could go through them fast. That's them. They're happy. That's the Afghan National Army. We went. This was during our embed. And at one point, Anya had wanted to do a photo portraits of these 5 soldiers, and we were at a little outpost. And first, when we got to the outpost, they said, "Oh, there are no foreigners here." So we said, "That's okay. We want to tell your story." And so she said, okay, everybody in your uniform, come line up. And one guy came with a helmet, and nobody else had a helmet. So they all came, and so Anya said, no, everybody get your helmet. They said, no, we just have one. So they had to share. And this was, not sure where this is, to tell you the truth. You keep going a little, yeah. This is back up on there was a rope because the snow was, and there was a blizzard day, so you needed the rope to get you from one end to the other. We had a huge blizzard, and we were in a room that had used to be their computer, and it was kerosene, and we woke up like, you know, black up our nose, and that was bringing lunch. So that was the embed. So.
Hi, here.
Oh, hi.
Hi, my name is Wen, and I'm a graduate student. So my question is mainly about the journalist side. So since you went to a lot of different places, how do you get access? I mean, when you enter into a new place, and how much access do you usually have? Do you have a expectation before that? And also, will you usually find a local fixer for that? So.
Yeah, depending on where, like when I started going to Central Asia, I'd never been to Central Asia, you know, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. So we have AP, I mean, we're so fortunate because we have bureaus everywhere. So we have local people everywhere, which is really, I mean, I have like a huge head start over so many. So there's that. And when you go to first when I go to a new place, I often go to a local newspaper, any newspaper. I try to go to 2 or 3. And talk to the journalists, the local reporters, and what kinds of stories they're doing. I try to see if there's anybody that I might know or know somebody, because I have friends who are from Central Asia. For example, I have a friend of mine who's from Kazakhstan, and so she knew somebody, and so she introduced me. So I try to make as many, and again, it goes back to that whole concept of contacts and how to get information. And then once you start to talk to people and meet people, then they introduce you to somebody else, and oh yes, I did a story on this, and so. And then their introduction often helps you because, of course, they have the reputation or they have and so if it's good, then they say, oh, yeah, okay, we'll tell you, and then that gets you into somebody else. And I went into Andijan in Uzbekistan, which was a joy for me. I mean, it was just so interesting, and I just talked to everybody. I mean, I just the businesses, the reporters at the newspapers, the NGOs, and I think when you're going into someplace fresh like that, you just have to go in and just try to talk to as many people as possible. And I came away with wonderful stories that in a way one turned out to be prophetic because it did lead to an uprising, or there was an uprising later that I had written about.
Hi, my name is Jesse. I'm a senior newspaper and online journalism major, and one of my career goals is to do international reporting. So I have a question for you, like in your career, like doing international reporting, have you ever faced any ethical issues? And if so, how do you usually deal with, reporting like in a different culture, like with maybe like different regulations on media or other reporting issues?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I can't think of a real ethical issue where I felt that. I mean, if I want to report about women, I report about women. If I want to report about, what I think is right or wrong really has nothing to do with the stories I'm writing about. I honestly, I'm trying to think of an ethical issue that I've had to, I've never had somebody say, don't report this, and I haven't. Decisions that I have no control over. For example, do we report on a particular kidnapping of somebody? That's not my decision to make. It's made by news organizations, so it has nothing to do with me. But if I'm doing a story, I ask the questions I want to ask. I try anyway. I try not to be disrespectful. But I can't think of a ethical issue that I've maybe I'm just not ethical. No.
All right, we have time for one last question.
So the dean would like to exercise her right to have the last question.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, you could do whatever you darn well please.
Sometimes.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Kathy, I want to thank you for taking the time to come to Syracuse and sharing your amazing story with us. And given your background and experience in Afghanistan, I'm very curious about your thoughts about the future of that country. We keep hearing that the Taliban is coming back and that things are falling apart. As someone who has spent so much time there, what do you see as its future?
Well, Afghanistan, it limps along. I think that I don't think the Taliban have come back. They have been there since 2002. I think what we're seeing today is sort of the result of many years of gradual erosion and opportunities that have been lost or squandered. I think and Afghanistan will continue to limp along. It doesn't seem at this point that there is, or at least I haven't seen, but I'll know better after I've been there. The working relationship between the two different governments that are ruling in Afghanistan. I think that it's still a very difficult time ahead. I think one thing that I find different than in previous times is that a lot of people are wanting to leave. they're leaving that had never wanted to leave before, or that never did leave before. And in part because there's such a tremendous sense of disappointment across the country that after so many years, 42 countries, all this money, and my goodness, what a, it's insecure, what a mess. And yes, there are, of course, girls are going to school, and yes, there's some, young kids are saying the right things, and that, but they're leaving in droves, and I think there is that real, and look at, again, they're pulling back on women and stuff because they see the Taliban are expressing themselves more. It's very difficult. They don't really understand. Most Afghans really don't understand how they got to this point, which is in many ways, whether you want to say worse than when the Taliban were there, whatever, but it certainly is not the country that they thought it would be after all of this. So I think that for me, that's the big difference today. But Afghanistan will limp along, and the people are really very much caught in the middle of a situation that they have very little control over yet. And how it plays out, whether the Taliban, they'll never come back, I don't think, as they did before 2001. But, will it be a variation of? Possibly, So with a mix of, other warlords and whatnot. So does that bode well for Afghans? Not really. And does that fulfill the hopes that they had? Not at all. So I mean, yeah. So it's. I don't think there's any definitive. This is where Afghanistan will be in 5 or 10 years. But I certainly think that the one thing that is different for me, anyway, is to see that real desire of people to leave.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you very much.
Now,
You didn't get to ask your question. You can ask. What's your level? Go ahead, ask.
all right, Brenda, you've got the last question.
Well, actually, my name is Brenda Muhammad, and I'm in the Documentary Film and History program. I didn't have a question. I was going to thank you for sharing the importance of the fundamentals of what we're learning, and also to overcome the fear of speaking at press conferences and things like that. So I thank you for bringing that here to us. So
aren't you sweet? Thank you very much. Oh, aren't you sweet? Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
Now, before we present the award, there are a lot of moving parts to an event like this, and I've got a number of people I need to thank, and I want to thank for dropping everything to put this together. Stanley Bondi, wherever you are. Stanley, he's probably off setting up for the next event. Thank you. Audrey Burian, thank you, as always, for navigating through the intricacies of everything we have to do. Angela, thank you. We've been working together. Dean Branham, thank you for your support. And Barbara Fote, you set the template for this years ago, and I appreciate your support over the years. Kathleen, it's no easy feat leading the world's largest news organization to come up to Syracuse for a day, and thank you. And Patricia, thank you for joining us. Of course, Kathy, thank you for joining us, and look forward to reading your next story.